Shalom. I am here with Rabbi Rafi Mollot, who has his own channel. Link below. Go subscribe. And am I saying that correctly, Mollot?
As good as any. My father said Mallet, but it's
Mollot.
really a Russian name, Mollot. So in America, we say Mallet.
Mallet. Okay. And he teaches a weekly parshah shiur on Tenak Talk, which is, I would say, probably the biggest Noahide channel on YouTube. And I have to say, you're one of my favorites on that channel, even though I love all the rabbis, but you really seem to prepare for the parsha shiur, which is really nice. And Rabbi Mollot has also been somewhat listening to my live streams and sometimes contributing, and I wanted to have him on to come speak, partially because in this little corner we don't actually have an actual rabbi like Rabbi Mollot, and so he's officially one of the rabbis on my Discord server, and of the 4 people who are in that category, he's the only one who's actually a rabbi.
Who's actually what? I didn't catch that.
Who's actually a rabbi.
Oh, meaning there are other rabbis that are not rabbis.
So Chezi, he spent 6 years learning in Yerushalayim after he grew up, his grandfather is a rabbi, and he comes from a prominent family. He spent 6 years learning in yeshiva. He was a chaplain in the IDF, but he doesn't actually have smicha. And Yosef, who also grew up from, he's been on Daf Yomi for 10 years, and so yeah, he knows his stuff very well, but he never got smicha either. And I don't even know what's. I don't want to dox the 4th guy, but he also both grew up from, and he's an incredibly smart guy, so he's learned a lot of Torah. Purple Flame, he goes on my Discord server, but I'm not gonna dox him. And then there's you, and you are possibly the highest form of rabbi, which is a melamed tinakos, right?
You're not so far off, to be honest.
Who you choose to teach your children, right? And honestly, I aspired when I had aspirations to the rabbinate. My aspiration was to teach in a cheder, because what does it say? Ha'olam yoshev al. What am I thinking? Right. Yeah. So translate that for us, Rabbi.
The breath of the mouth of the children learning in Jewish school, Torah school.
Yeah. Beis Rabban, right? So on YouTube, we have a lot of people, some of whom are putzes who go around calling themselves rabbis, and then we have rabbis like Rabbi Breitowitz, who is a genuine posek, right? And a Rav, and even Chacham Hillel. He has a YouTube channel which has all. Did you know he has a YouTube channel?
You mentioned it, but I'm not really aware of it.
Yeah, it's in English. So he has. Sometimes he speaks in Hebrew, but he has a. So Chacham Hillel is one of the Poskei Hador. He has he's one of the best known rabbis in the actual Jewish world, like Haredi Jewish world. But his channel is tiny. And then there's the Yanuka. So I was actually hoping you might kind of just. He actually has his channel's actually pretty big, and I was surprised. Like I first heard of him from Christians,
Me too. Well,
and then
not from Christians per se. I first heard of him from an ex-Christian who's not Jewish,
mm,
who I guess we would kind of pin him as a Noahide. I don't think he self-identifies that way, but he asked me about the Yanuka, and I was like, I don't know what you talking about, So then I did a search on it, and all these evangelical websites have the Yanuka as the Antichrist and everything. And I'm like, I don't even know who this guy is. Then you find some Jewish sites that talk about him, and all they say is that he's this like incredible prodigy. He learns all day. He speaks to thousands. All the Gedolei Torah endorse him as being a true sage. And he's only like 30, but he's been this way since a child. And there's nothing about him being Mashiach, but all the Christian websites talk about how, the false Messiah, the Yanuka. It's like, I don't know a single Jew who thinks this guy is Mashiach. Unless
who
he's
thinks he is Mashiach, maybe not, but Bechezkas Mashiach, there definitely are people. And frankly, I would be fine with what?
They don't talk to me.
Well, I'm talking to you. But have you listened to his Torah?
I have not.
Oh, blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. And the beauty of it was, like, he spoke for over an hour, and the maskana was, he was explaining that part of Shema that we say silently, V'chara af Hashem bachem. Right?
The Sephardim say it silently. The Ashkenazim don't.
Oh, you guys just say it normal?
You say it like everything else.
We always you say it a little lower.
Right,
but,
right. I noticed that in the Sephardic congregations.
Yeah. But like and it was the first time in a very long time where I was listening to somebody, and like, now my kavana in Kriyas Shema is a little bit more understanding, and especially it's a very dry part of Shema. For me, at least, it had been. So like, the fact that he was able to nuance like that part of Shema for me was like, it blew my mind. So I was like, okay, I'm fine. If this guy's Mashiach, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Now, for the record, again, I don't know really anything about him other than what I've already said, which I got out of a Google search. He seems to me very legit as far as being a Talmud Chacham, that is a Torah scholar, a God-fearing person, to the max. Let's say he's the best of the best, right?
And he finishes all his shiurim by playing a concert.
Oh yeah, and he's a musical genius also, I heard, which is really special and nice, for sure. Yeah. That I'm glad that there is that, because you have hi, I'm on a call. I'm home with my kids. What am I gonna do? You have people in the Torah world who are like almost against music because it's somehow non-Jewish, right? And I knew a guy in a certain yeshiva, I'm not going to say which, where the head of the yeshiva basically, and this guy loved to play guitar, and it might have been just because it was guitar and the Rosh Yeshiva considered guitar goyish or whatever, but he told him, like, you can't be in our yeshiva and play guitar. You need to choose one or the other. Now, this was a guy who was so gifted in learning and had such a great fun personality that he was the guy you wanted to know and you wanted to be friends with. He was fun and funny, but he was a God-fearing person and a budding scholar. And this just broke him. It's just broke him. He couldn't reconcile the two. He's like, you're gonna ask me to choose between Torah and my music? Now the truth is, obviously, Torah, if it was a true contest, Torah would win the contest, but it's not a contest. In other words, music is such a grand part of Torah. But I think it may have been, maybe I'm mischaracterizing. Maybe it was more the fact that a guitar in particular was somehow some type of non-Jewish thing. But this is a yeshiva, let's say, that's connected to the Lakewood Yeshiva, where we know famously Shlomo Carlebach, the musical rabbi, came out of that yeshiva and was greatly shunned by that yeshiva. So I think there's almost a fear, and Shlomo Carlebach is a big jar of pickles to open as far as his controversy, and there's a lot of controversy around him that I think is rightfully placed. We could say a lot about him.
There were very, very few people that the Rebbe told them they're not allowed to use the name Chabad anymore. And I actually heard this story from Rabbi Hartman, who taught the Gur Aryeh Shir when I was at Or Sameach. So we, for anybody who didn't know, we went to the same yeshiva, and Rabbi Hartman told me this story. He said that Shlomo Carlebach, when the Rebbe told him he could no longer be part of Chabad, came and stayed by them that night, and told him that no matter what anybody says, the Rebbe said to him, anytime you want to come back, you can come back. But the Rebbe set some rules for him, which he was not willing to live by those rules. And the Rebbe told him he's not allowed to use the name Chabad anymore.
Shlomo Carlebach is a complicated person. We could say a lot about him. We could say a lot about him, but it would take up the hour. So we're not going to go there so much. But the point is, I think, because before I'll tell you this much. The Shlomo Carlebach, before he had any connection with Chabad, he was a student in the Lakewood Yeshiva. It's well known that he was one of the top students in the Lakewood Yeshiva. He himself was a great Torah scholar, and they say very close to Rav Aaron Kotler, who was the Rosh Yeshiva. He was the head of the yeshiva. And the way I heard this story from Shlomo Carlebach, not in person, but on a recording, that he spoke at the Rebbe's, one of the Rebbe's yortzites, that is the anniversary of his passing, or his ascension, or his concealment, or whatever you want to do.
His talkos is fine.
Don't get me started on the Litvak. Anyway.
Look, the fact is, and I've spoken about this many times, including with my rabbi who I had on here for the Rebbe's yortzeit, Gimel Tammuz. There's a lot of people. I'm glad you said
yortzeit.
What?
I'm glad you said yortzeit.
Of course, it's yortzeit.
But there are those who won't say that.
Okay. So the fact is, a lot of people don't understand why in Chabad there are people who still can't get over the fact of the Rebbe's histalkus, and to the point where certain people will in fact not be noheg all of the things that the Rabbanim in Chabad said you should be noheg on Gimel Tammuz, which is all of the same things that the Rebbe was noheg for the histalkus of his father-in-law. And what a lot of people don't understand, and it's unfortunate that a certain person who is very well known in certain circles wrote certain books which are, I would say, Motzi Shemra, but at the very least Lashon Hara, regarding
I know
Chabad.
Who you're talking about. He was a close teacher of mine.
I won't say anymore, but the fact is there are people in Chabad who still mourn the Rebbe in ways that I don't think people who are not Hasidim really understand. And this is a discussion I've had to have with many Litvaks because of the things that person wrote and other people have said, including people at our yeshiva, and I won't talk about that other person at our yeshiva. There was a recording that came out of Or Sameach several years ago, of a shir that was very, very controversial, and I contacted the rabbi who gave that shir because I had been close to him when I was at Or Sameach.
Pretty sure I was
And
there.
I was very, very disappointed in his response. I was very, very disappointed in his response, and I was disappointed in Or Sameach's response.
So I tell
But
you, the funny thing is, not that it's funny per se. I think he got for that by Or Sameach because they were kind of attacked by the Chabad community after that was published, and
I don't
Or
know
Sameach
any.
tries to maintain a warm and friendly connection with all sectors of at least the Orthodox world, if not also the non-Orthodox world. So when it came out from their yeshiva, these very pejorative statements about the Chabad movement, I think Or Sameach
About the Rebbe himself. No, the things that he said, I listened to that video, to that audio, and I contacted him. The things that he said are things that nobody should say ever, regardless. But specifically to speak about the Rebbe the way he did, I don't know that any Chabad Shliach will send anybody to Or Sameach anymore. And when I went to Or Sameach, I had a picture of the Rebbe up. And so nobody would speak to me the way he spoke. It's the fact is, there is a certain hatred, sinas chinam, I would call it, that exists in certain places, and a particular person who is at YU now has had a huge part in it, and the fact that his book talks about the scandal of Orthodox indifference should teach him, you putz, who do you think you are to speak against the Gedolei Israel, none of whom support you? You putz. I'm sorry, this gets me very emotional.
I'm gonna tear Kriya if you keep talking like that about my teacher. I don't know, you want to call me a fence sitter, I don't know what you want to call me. I'm very friendly to everybody, and I have a lot of respect for Chabad, for the good things they do. Okay, I know that's kind of like already a banality to say that, but there's also problems, and I don't take a hard line position. I'm not a Rav Shachnik, not against the Rav Ovadia, and not against the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I'm also not a Chabadsker. I recognize the faults on both sides, and I recognize the positives on both sides. And I try to be that guy. I try to be that guy who's going to see no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. You might be perfect. I don't know you enough yet. But I'm saying
wherever you go, wherever you go, you're going to find out that all the people there are human beings, and that's a very difficult thing for people to accept. That
right.
People, so wherever you go, the people are human beings.
So we all think we're perfect, and then or our side is perfect, or our Rebbe is perfect, or whatever it is, our yeshiva is perfect, and so we're looking for faults with everyone else. This is a very non-Torah hashkafa. This is a very non-Torah position. And, I'm going to share what I heard from Rav Zev Leff, who I consider to be one of the greatest Torah minds of our generation. And you may have had interaction with him when you were in Or Sameach, but he was one of my teachers in Or Lagola, as was one of the other individuals you're referencing. The one at YU was my teacher in Brooklyn College for several semesters, and I had a nice relationship with him outside of the classroom, where we talked about everything under the sun regarding these topics. And I have great respect and reverence for him. But in Or Sameach and Or Lagola, I also had as an instructor the other individual you're referencing, who in the year that I sat in front of him spoke against Chabad and spoke against Nassan Slavkin. These two recordings made a very big splash in the Orthodox world, and he got tremendous pushback on both of those.
I think he should have been fired.
I have feelings about different feelings about all of that, but I can tell you, I don't know if he had absolute charata, that means regret, on what he said, but when
I
we made
emailed him.
recordings,
I
I don't remember.
emailed him because I wanted to clear it up, because I was very close to Chabad Shluchim, and because I couldn't believe that he said those things, and the email responses he gave me were even worse than what he said publicly.
Okay, listen, I'm happy we haven't said his name. I hope people don't know who we're talking about, but I have to tell you, this is another case of people being imperfect. I have my issues with him. I have my issues with things that he has said and continues to say. I don't want to make this, a referendum on him as a person. He has a lot of tremendous positive qualities, and we should embrace those aspects and applaud them. And what is negative, we should either not talk about, not give it airtime, or if it comes up, say, I object, I don't agree to that. I can say that about that person. I can say that about Victor Miller of blessed memory, whom I quote all the time, and they'll put me in the chayrim if they catch some of the things I've said, but I don't agree with everything he said. I just had a conversation with someone the other day where I said, I think some of the things he said are extremely regrettable that came out of the mouth of a Torah person, and I wish he had never said them. I don't agree with them. And it's not just that I don't agree with them. I know from my broader experience in the Torah world and learning from great sages and scholars that this is not the view of the Torah world broadly. It was his personal view, and there are people who take every statement he says as the gospel truth, as it were, or what we call Torah Sinai. And if you say otherwise, you're some type of a heretic. And I have to say to them, I was a big Rav Miller chassid. I was a big devotee. I was a big devotee of Rav Miller. But I grew up and I learned more. And I said, you know what? I'm going to say to you something I said in a public class. Like I said, they haven't found this class yet, so they didn't put me in chayrim yet. Is Rav Miller doesn't have a monopoly on opinions. He doesn't have a monopoly on opinions. He had his opinion, and there are those who disagree with him. I'm gonna tell you a story. We're going on so many tangents. I don't think we're ever going to discuss one topic fully. But
this is why I wanted at least 2 hours with you.
Yeah, here. So, but will we ever cycle back to where we started? I don't know. But Rav Yitzchak Hutner was one of the great Gedolei Torah, the great Torah giants of the 20th century. He studied in the Slobodki Yeshiva in Eastern Europe before it was destroyed during the war, and he was the leader of the Chaim Berlin Yeshiva in Brooklyn, New York. One of the great Torah luminaries of our time, or previous generation, people say now. So Rav Hutner and Rav Miller studied together in Slobodka Yeshiva. When they were both in New York and Rav Hutner was running the Chaim Berlin Yeshiva, he hired Rav Miller as his mashkiach, which is what you might call this yeshiva's spiritual advisor. Now, Rav Miller was very tough. He was very strict. And he would lock the doors to the base medrash, the study hall. He would lock the doors at 9 a.m. That's when learning Seder started. The learning period began at 9. If you weren't in there, you weren't serious, and you could not participate that day. He would lock the doors at 9 o'clock, and the boys would be shut out. He was not particularly merciful when it came to these things. He wanted a tight ship. He wanted people that were extremely serious in a certain way. He was trying to recreate Slobodka in Brooklyn, New York, which was honestly impossible to do. And Rav Hutner saw that, and Rav Hutner disagreed with his approach, with his hardline approach. And to my knowledge, I'm saying based on my knowledge, Rav Hutner dismissed him from his position at the yeshiva. Okay, so it's known that Rav Hutner, who was one of the great Torah luminaries of the generation, and Rav Miller, who was one of the great Torah luminaries of the generation, and he had his own congregation, and he was a light of Torah from there that reached around the world. There's no question about it. They did not see eye to eye. And to the point that again, I'm speaking from the perspective. I did not attend the Chaim Berlin Yeshiva. I was a devotee of Rav Miller, and when I sat at the Shabbos table of a rabbi who's alive today, he's a very, very great scholar. He's one of the, if not the principal disciples of Rav Hutner. And I consider him to be one of my own Rebbeim, one of the great influences in my life. I sat at his Shabbos table with naivete, not understanding really the context in which I was saying certain things at the table. And I was quoting a lot of Rav Miller's teachings at his Shabbos table. And for reasons I couldn't understand, he became visibly uncomfortable with the things I was saying. And it was weird. I got this vibe that was like not a joyful one when I was saying these things. And at a certain point, he stopped me and he said, he's just like, enough. He didn't let me continue speaking. And he said these words to me. He said, let Rav Miller rest in peace. And now that is Torah. And what I mean by that is, you see a gadol, you see a great Torah sage. He doesn't say, let me give you a piece of my mind about Rav Miller this and Rav Miller that. In his soft, gentle, peaceful Torah way, he gave over to me everything I needed to know to understand his view on what I was saying, with the nicest, kindest words a person could say.
Darkei Noam.
Let Rav Miller rest in peace was his words. Not a word of criticism, just a clear message with peaceful words. He said, this is not the way. And if it's the way you think is the way, you're not going to say it here at my table. So again, that's just one example. There's many schools of thought. There's many streams of thought in the Torah world. And in my journeys in growth and learning, I've come to be aware of this wider picture and to embrace this wider picture. And I know that I can't stand in any one lane and say, this is it. I have to look at everything and say, there's room for everybody, again, within limits. But we don't have to invalidate people, passel people, as we say. So I'm saying, look, Rabbi, you know who said certain regrettable things, and maybe he should be criticized for that, but I don't invalidate him as a person. I would say he has a lot of great qualities and great teachings that should be embraced. And the regrettable things that he said, we could regret that he said, and we don't have to accept that. We don't have to accept that. So how did we get on this? So Rav Shlomo Carlebach, his own a person of great controversy himself.
Yeah.
Rav Shlomo was in Lakewood Yeshiva, and this is what he said. I heard this on a recording. He said his chavrusa told him, you should go see the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In other words, it was a big thing at the time, and I remember in my time, again, Rabbi Carlebach, this already predates me by decades, but I remember in my time growing up in Brooklyn, it was a very big thing to go to the Rebbe. You go, you get a blessing from him, he give you $1. You know, I know all these people who walked around with Rebbe dollars. I never went in for this. My father didn't go in for segulas and brachas and things like that. He had a much more litvish derech.
How old are you?
I'm 42.
Oh, okay. I thought
Rebbe
you were
was
much younger
nifter in
than I am.
94. I'm born 1980. So as a child until bar mitzvah and a little bit beyond, I was aware of, I was aware of the Rebbe.
I was not aware of the Rebbe until after he died.
So I was aware all along, and I can tell you incredible.
And I'm 3 years older than you are.
I was very close to a Chabad family. They lived next door to me. They probably have a big chelik in why I'm from today. And just to put that in context, I grew up in a very confusing household. my kids ask me, "Are you a Baal Tshuva?" I can't say no, but they also ask me, like, did you grow up non-religious? I can't really say yes, right? Because my father grew up secular and my mother grew up secular. They were both born in New York and into secular Jewish families. They got married as two secular Jews, and my father became Baal Tshuva, but my mother did not. So the interesting thing is that they probably both grew up in homes that did not keep Shabbos or kosher, but didn't eat pork. My mother never ate pork. My father probably grew up in a home not eating pork, although in the 60s, when he was in college, he became a total iconoclast and a real hippie, and he rejected all, social, what do they call them? Constructs, whatever, and did everything. He did everything. But that was the zeitgeist. Well, what happened was interesting. It's another interesting influence. I just told this story to somebody on Shabbos. I don't know the full story. I just remember what I heard between my father and my grandmother on my mother's side, my mother's mother. The pieces I put together from the story. But basically, my father and my mother were married, and my mother's mother somehow came into possession of a vinyl record that was a recording of Rav Meir Kahana speaking at a college campus, in his way about, Jewish pride and Jewish ideology and Torah Sinai and why this matters and why this is relevant today, and really trying to fire up a secular Jewish college crowd to buy into Torah and mitzvahs, to buy into Israel and Zionism, etc., and activism. So my grandmother, my mother's mother, says to my father, he says, "This guy's crazy." She says, holding the Meir Kahana record. I think you'll like him. She gives him the record. He listened to it. He said he never heard anything like it. Here was a guy talking about objective truth and God and the eternity of the soul and the message from Sinai and the eternity of Torah. And he said he was never given this message as a kid. He was never given this. He told me as a kid he would go to shul, and they would teach him the Bible stories, and he would be, and the Reform rabbis eating a ham sandwich. And my father's like, "Why are you eating ham if the Torah says you're not allowed?" And they would say, "Oh, those laws don't apply today." Because that doesn't matter. None of this matters, right? Whatever. So he got the messaging that none of this matters. And then all of a sudden he hears for the first time in life, someone says, "This really matters. This is objectively true. It's straight from God. It comes from Sinai, and it's as true today as it was then." And, my father just got fired up, and he went to Rav Meir Kahana, and, he said, "Rebbe, lead me." So my father. So now, so that said, I grew up with a certain Kahanist hashkafa, but I went through the same evolution. I went through the same process of just becoming more exposed to the broader Torah world. And like you said about one person, the Gedolim, Ein lecha shomea min haGedolim, right? Ein lecha shomea min haGedolim. The Gedolim aren't on your side. So you look around and you see the Gedolim are not on his side. So again, they say, "Mi ani lahachnis roshi bein shnei harim gedolim." I'm going to stick my head in between great mountains. This isn't a place for me to decide who's right and who's wrong, but the consensus in the Torah world is, again, it's either not the way, or it's certainly not the only way, or it's certainly not the mainstream way. And so I started to put a little more balance on my approach and my derech. But growing up, I had one parent keeping Shabbos and one parent not keeping Shabbos, and then they got divorced, and that left me and it left me in a very confused place. And I had my own vacillation growing up as a teenager. Do I go this way? Do I go this way? You know, is it true? Is it not true? You know, and I did my own introspection, my own self-reflection, my own exploration. And to be honest, I did a lot of talking to God. And if there's one thing that your viewers gain from this, anything I'm saying, the most important thing any person could do, and I remember having this conversation with my roommate in Or Sameach, who was a non-observant Jew who was becoming Orthodox, you know, and I was asking him, like, you know, what do you do that's like spiritual? And he was telling me how he like talks to God and things like that. And I said, no matter how Orthodox they make you, it's a funny thing to say, never stop talking to God. And it's a funny thing to say. No, aren't I becoming more religious? Aren't I becoming more God conscious? And the answer is no, sadly, because not necessarily, but Orthodox Judaism is so technical that when you get burdened by all the minutiae, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it needs to be tempered and contextualized within a relationship with God. But we forget about the relationship with God, and then we just do all the things. We do all the things, and we leave. We daven, we pray, we sit, we stand with a sitter, we open it up, we say all the words, and not for 1 second are we thinking about God. All I know is I have to read the script. I have to read the script, right? I was way more spiritual when I was less religious than at a certain point in my religious journey when I you might call my flaming Baal Tshuva days, when I got very, very attached to, you know, nitty gritty details, and I forgot how to have a soul. You know what I mean? And so as a person growing and developing spiritually in this kind of la la land limbo of I don't even know what Judaism is and how it connects to me and what I'm supposed to be, and if I want to be, do I want it? What is it do I want? What is it altogether? You know, but I think there was never a point that I didn't think, listen, there's a God, and I'm just going to talk to him. And I would speak to God, and I would just ask him to guide me and ask him to help me and ask him to forgive me when I didn't do what I thought he wanted me to do. And I always had that relationship with him. And, you know, that it was a long journey. It was a long journey. I don't know how much detail I should go into about my journey from going confused, wishy-washy, quasi-religious to being a committed Orthodox rabbi, you know. But I was going somewhere with this, which is, we're talking about Shlomo Carlebach. So maybe we'll come back to my own story. But so Shlomo was in the Lakewood Yeshiva, and his chavrusa says to him, you should see the Rebbe. Somehow we got sidetracked on there. You should go visit the Rebbe. And, you know, I'm sure like every Litvak, he was hemming and hawing like, I don't do Hasidic Rebbes. I have my own Hasidic Rebbe stories of the Rebbes that I met, and they're very impressive. So I'm not such a cold Litvak, you know. I'm a
Baruch
warm
Hashem.
I'm a warm Litvak. I'm a warm Litvak. I'm very open. I'm very open and welcoming. That's why my wife gave me the moniker "Everybody's Rebbe." I started posting it on my videos. Everybody's Rebbe, you know, because I embrace everybody. So, and we could talk more about it, but he says, Shlomo, that he went to the Rebbe because somebody told him, oh, you should go see the Rebbe. Okay, finally decided, what's the hype? What's the hype? And he goes to the Rebbe, and he goes into him, and he said that when the Rebbe spoke to him, he felt as though the Rebbe these are his words, gave me a new neshama mamish, which means he gave me a new soul. A new soul. Like he said, he felt like whatever soul was in him was replaced by something new. And the Rebbe said to him something like, you know, you have a good heart. You should reach out to your fellow Jew. You should bring them close. And that was something he never did. He sat in yeshiva his whole life just learning Masechtas, And all of a sudden the Rebbe's like, you have a good heart. Go out and bring other Jews close. And he said, a new neshama came into him. He became transformed in that moment. And he said from the minute he walked out of that room with the Rebbe, every Jew he saw, he just saw his brother, he saw his sister, he saw someone, a neshama, a soul that he loved and wanted to embrace. He said he just wanted to embrace every person that he saw and bring them close. That's all he wanted to do. And that's what he ended up doing, is he went and he, with his music, and I don't know when he became musical, at what point along the way, but he was in Lakewood and he played the guitar. Oh, so that's how I got on this, is that maybe the reason that in this, I will call it a Lakewood connected yeshiva, they told my friend, you can't be here and play the guitar. I feel like it was a certain PTSD from, we once had a guy like that. Now, what was the problem, just for your audience, right? What was the problem is when I say that he literally wanted to embrace every Jew, he literally wanted to embrace every Jew.
And that was the rule the Rebbe told him he's not, he has to be Shomer Negia, and he refused. And right. Now he got Me Too'd. A couple of years ago, he got Me Too'd because of everything, and that was the line that the Rebbe told him, no, you can't. And the fact is, a lot of the shluchim the Rebbe sent to places like Haight-Ashbury and to the hippies, a large number of them fell away. Many of them didn't. But a large number of them, 3 very prominently fell away. But those 3 created what's now called the Neo-Hasidic movement, which still is having an effect. You actually see it. So it's like, honestly,
I want to talk more about the Neo-Hasidic movement.
What do you want to say?
I feel like you're a Neo-Hasid. That's what I feel.
In a sense, I am. So like I said,
and I have more to say about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I come from a Mizrahi background. My father studied in Israel. He was at Technion, and for him, like, he thought religiosity was mostly superstition, things we were going to outgrow. And so when we came to the United States, I just remember when I was at Or Sameach, I went to Or Sameach after college. I was in the center program. And my parents came to visit me. And my dad said to me when we first came to the United States, one of the from schools here in Los Angeles offered him free tuition so he wouldn't put me in public school. And he went to visit, and he saw the kids running around with Yanuka and tzitzis, and he decided, even for free, I don't want my kid growing up like that. And he was saying this to me in Yerushalayim when I was at Or Sameach, wearing a yarmulke and tzitzis, and he was like, and he had resigned himself. It's not up to me, right? But my parents very much. My dad to this day, just last month, he was congratulating me on leaving the OCD lifestyle of being Shomer Torah or mitzvahs, which, it's like what do you do with that? My father. He literally he thinks I outgrew being obsessive compulsive in not being Shomer Torah mitzvahs, right? But how did I get onto this? So in college, the only rabbis that were available to me were Chabad. And so when I became religious, despite the fact that I still have lots of criticisms of Chabad. When I went to Or Sameach, I bought a picture of the Rebbe and I put it up on my picture in my room, because it was like, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for Chabad and the Rebbe, right? And so for me,
I was making, that's
yeah.
what we got on this also. I was making a comment about how I had a Chabad family living next door to me that had a very strong influence on me at a certain impressionable period of my life. That I said they may have some credit in why I'm Orthodox today, but I digress. Yes, so say more.
So and I was about as misnagdish as a Sephardic Chabadnik can get, but I always kept that shaykhus with
Jacob, can I just pause you for a second? My wife is calling me.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, when he comes back, maybe I should I should translate all the things we're talking about. So there are obviously divisions in Orthodox Judaism, and there we go. Okay. So I kept that shaykhus with Chabad, and the first time I got engaged, a rabbi I respected here in Los Angeles pulled me aside and wanted to learn that book about Orthodox indifference be'iyun with me.
Oh, wow.
Because the fact that I had any shaykhus with Chabad made me, and that, so very likely, I mean, I don't know, maybe everything's from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but one of the big issues why I didn't end up marrying the first person I was kind of engaged to was because of the hisnagdus against Chabad, and it was directed at me, not because I had any weird Chabad ideas, but because I refused to cut Chabad out of my life.
It's tragic. This is the type of extremism that is a plague and a blight on our community, and it exists in all sectors. Meaning, and I'm sorry to say this, and please don't take this personally, the extremism in Satmar I find to be highly problematic. The extremism in Chabad I find highly problematic, and the extremism in the so-called mainstream yeshiva world I find highly problematic, including this kind of hyper antagonism toward Chabad. And there is a certain well-placed criticism of certain problems. But in other words, we focus on the problems and we make the definition of our Judaism, we're not them, right? There's no, so what I was saying about Rav Leff before, he says the way of the Torah is to build up, not to knock down, right? The people who are knocking, they're knocking down because there's an insecurity about who they are. When you're insecure about who you are and what you are, the only way that you can feel secure is by knocking down everyone else because they threaten you, because you're insecure. But when you're not insecure, you don't knock. You build up, you don't break down. So
right. But let me say one thing. There is a problem also in not knocking down certain things, and we talked about certain other people before we started, that unfortunately, the misplaced, so Rabbi Wagner, who's my rabbi, his father had cancer, and he ended up dying because the doctors didn't want to put him through another surgery. And his mother said to me, while she was explaining everything that happened, she said to me, misplaced Rahmanis will also kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely true. There's no question about it. And I think that boils down to the statement of the sages. It says, a person should always, it says, Makarev biyamin v'docha b'smol. You draw close with the right hand and you push with the left hand. The idea being the right hand, which is associated with strength, meaning your stronger hand, your dominant, call it a dominant hand. So I don't want to confuse with gvura, which is a left-handed property. But we'll call the dominant hand is the right. You bring the dominant mode has to be drawing close. The dominant mode has to be rachamim. But there can't be chesed without din. In other words, there's a reason why chesed, which means kindness, also means in the Torah shame. There's a reason that chesed, because when it goes too far, it's destructive, right? So there has to be a balance. But what's interesting about the balance is, you take a small amount of din, of restrictiveness, to balance a lot of the kindness. If you would put them in equal measure, it would also be destructive. It's a very precision tool. The din, the midas hadin, the restrictiveness. So I'm saying you have to be docha biyamin. When you push away, docha bismol, you push with the left. The midah of pushing away, of being restrictive, is in lighter measure,
with the weak hand.
Far lighter measure. This is all over the Torah, where it says that God rewards for 1,000 or 2,000 generations, but He punishes only for 3 or 4 generations. And Rashi says, here you have 2,000, and there you have 4 generations, right? So it comes out that the Hashem's measure of reward is 500 times larger than His measure of punishment. 1 to 500 ratio. 1 to 500 ratio. It's there. There's a 1, but it's measured against a 500 ratio. So in other words, things need to be criticized when they need to be criticized. But if the dominant mode is attack, there's something very wrong. There's something very toxic. There's something very tameh over there. But when the dominant mode is love and kindness, and once in a while they have to bring out that restrictiveness, that's pure, that's holy, that's proper. And that's the difference. I strive to be that person whose dominant mode is loving kindness, and occasionally we need to put restrictions, because a world without restrictions is also a destroyed world. It's also a destroyed world.
So the Gemara, that's a great segue into what the people listening will probably be most interested about. The Gemara that talks about Yoshki.
No, because first of all, it's arguable if the Gemara does talk about him. I don't know why I had a premonition you were going to ask me this. I was almost like rehearsing the script in my car the other day. What if he asks me about Yoshki in the Gemara? Right. So it's questionable whether the Gemara references him at all. And if they do reference him, it's a person who's certainly exceedingly different than what's described in Christianity or Islam.
Yeah.
And all those references have been expunged by Christian censors, so we don't really learn them. So all that together is I can't really answer in an affirmative to the question, the Gemara about Yoshki. Not really. Not really. But
I agree with you. I agree with you. One point I keep on making, especially in firm context, is, look, if this were something that was integral to Torah, right? If these parts of the Gemara that certain people would like to bring, especially, it's funny, but like, I actually hear it far more from Muslims and Christians than you will ever hear about these Gemaras from people. But you actually, when somebody who is actually within Yiddishkeit, within Orthodox Judaism, brings them up, the point I always make is,
well, this is the Gemara. This is the Gemara. The Gemara where it says a person should draw close with the right and push with the left. That is supposedly the Gemara that says like Gehazi, right? What did Elisha do? He pushed Gehazi with the right hand. He pushed him too hard, and look where he ended up, right? And there are those who say that either it was changed from Yashka to Gehazi as like, it was just a front, or that Gehazi is a code word for Yashka, right? I don't buy that at all. I think that is
really
castles built in the sky. I think that's sensationalism. They're trying to sensationalize this Gemara. I think it means exactly what it says it means. Elisha pushed away Gehazi with both hands, and what happened to Gehazi happened to Gehazi, and it was regrettable, and it could have been avoided. Within that Gemara, there is a censored bit. It says, and then it goes on to talk about, I think it's, what is it? Onkelos is he's
that's a different Gemara. That's a different Gemara.
Gemara of Zara, and this one's a Gemara in Saita. I might be crossing the wires because I don't know. Look, the fact well for the reasons I've stated, but I seem to recall this Gemara coming up in the context of a Yashki reference. But be that as it may, you talk.
Yeah. No, I actually wanted to ask you about, in general, like teaching Gemara like this, but like the questions about the Talmud I get from like most of the people who listen to my channel aren't Jewish, is about those Gemaras. And when I say that these aren't things, vast majority of Orthodox Jews don't even care, haven't even looked. And those that do care, what I say to them is, look, we have a Tzura Sadaf, right? That doesn't have these censored parts, right? If these teachings were such important parts of Yiddishkeit, do you seriously think that we would put so much stake on the Tzura Sadaf that doesn't have them? That at the very least, if they're being censored in the print editions, like everybody would have a machberet or something. If it's something important, if it's Torah, right? And Torah is nitzchi, and it's Torah that we all must learn, right? Then how did the Gedolim allow this to be censored at all?
Well, I don't know how much it's a question of allowing, because the censors were not the Jewish. What happened? I mean, the way I understand it, anyway, because I've seen censored Gemaras, and by that I mean you literally have the books with the passages burnt out, like burnt, right? Yeah. The pages are because they had to hand the books to the local Christian parishioner or whatever, and he would go through it, and the parts he didn't like, he would just burn the text, and it would be black. And I've seen those texts. So it's not like they chose what to censor. It wasn't their choice. But let's put it this way. The newer Gemaras will put them in the margins, right? The censored bits in the margins. But like you pointed out, for hundreds of years, it was printed without it. It became more or less so obscure as to be unknown in the Jewish world, and Judaism went on just fine. So in other words, I agree to your point that whatever the teachings were, and we don't even know anymore, they're clearly so not central that we've done just fine without them. And then when we go back and try to reconstruct what they were from older manuscripts or however they figure this stuff out, it's debatable, what these things even meant. So I don't get hung up on it, but I'm wondering if you have a specific question.
Well, the reason, I don't think you watched my 3-hour discussion with Father Stephen Dion.
No.
Okay. so for me, like, it was a real question because he's going around. He was speaking about a certain Gemara, and like I've heard him speak about it several times, and it's obviously not what the Gemara is. And he got it from Robert Alter, and he got it from the academic
It's
people.
so awful.
Right.
It's so awful. They quote. I get these comments on my YouTube channel. The Talmud's an evil book. It says blah, 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 blah. And I was like, tell me please exactly where in the Talmud it says that. You know, and like, oh, you don't know your own book. Either they accuse me of not knowing my own book, or of lying, or of I know it's true, and I'm a Satan worshiper, and I'm hiding the truth. It's like self-fulfilling logic circles, you know, circular reasoning of, you know, I know your Talmud's evil because I know the Talmud's evil.
Right.
I know it's true
and you're lying. And when you say that it doesn't say any such thing, you're lying.
Right.
But,
which, by the way, that takes me back to the Chabad thing and so many other, you know, the famous mashal, I don't know how famous it is, but it's famous by me, that you know, the guy comes into the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist says, you know, what's the problem? And he says, well, I'm a corpse, you know. And the guy says, you mean you believe you're a corpse? He says, no, I know I'm a corpse. He said, you know, whatever he tries to convince him he's not a corpse. He says, no, I'm not convinced. I know I'm a corpse. He says, could we come up with a test to prove to me whether you're a corpse or not? You know, because I don't believe that you're a corpse.
Right.
So, you know, they're trying to come up with the tests. You've heard this analogy before?
No, I haven't.
The psychiatrist says to him, do corpses bleed? And the guy says, no, everybody knows a corpse doesn't bleed, which is true. The corpse doesn't bleed. There's no blood pressure. So he says, so if I cut you, will you bleed? Since you're a corpse. He says, no, obviously I won't bleed. He said, and if I cut you and you do bleed, is that proof that you're not a corpse? And he says, yes, that would be proof that I'm not a corpse. He says, okay. He pulls out his X-Acto blade. You know, he says, whatever, give me your hand. Makes a little incision, and blood starts to trickle out. And the psychiatrist says, what do you say now? And you know what he answers him? He says, what do you know? Corpses do bleed. Right? This is the circular reasoning. So the thing with Chabad was, so this is when I was there, okay, I was a bar mitzvah boy. I was bar mitzvahed in a shul with the Chabad rabbi. Now, this Chabad rabbi, like I said, I spent many Shabbosim at his table. His son-in-law lived next door to me, and many Shabbosim at his table. And at a time when I was an impressionable teenager that was being pulled by many forces that were not in the spirit of Torah, I clung firmly to the Torah because of the connection that these Chabad families gave me. So I have a lot of affection. I really do. But at the time that the Rebbe was alive, and they were saying the Rebbe's Mashiach, the Rebbe's Mashiach, the Rebbe's Mashiach, I wasn't a Chabadsker. I went to a modern Orthodox school at the time. So, you know, my hashkafas, if you could even call them that, my worldview was not a Hasidic one at all. I was 13. I was also a know-nothing. You know, I was also like tantamount to an idiot. But I certainly didn't believe the Rebbe was Mashiach. But I had friends who were my age, who were Chabad, who really believed that he was the Mashiach, like absolutely convinced. And then when the Rebbe got sick, he had his stroke, and people were concerned that he was not going to live very long. And there was 24-hour prayer vigils and everything going on. I said to my friend, my Chabad friend, who was around my age, and maybe to his mother also, because she was also one of these people, probably to every Chabad person, but I remember my friend, I said, what will you do if the Rebbe dies? Okay, now listen to this answer. He won't die. He won't die. How do you know he's not going to die? Because he's the Mashiach. Mashiach can't die. You know what I'm saying to you right now? Listen to what I'm saying. Mashiach can't die. And he's for sure Mashiach, so he's for sure not going to die. And I'm like, and if he would die, would you change your belief? He won't die. There wasn't an iota of an idea of, even if he dies, he's still the Mashiach. Of course he won't die because he's Mashiach, and Mashiach can't die. Of course I won't bleed because I know I'm a corpse, and a corpse doesn't bleed. Then the Rebbe died. I'll say he died, but I know people who wouldn't say that. And they said,
I know people who wouldn't say that too, but I have to tell you, the line from that people from outside tell, the people from outside don't understand what's going on within Chabad. They really don't.
Maybe.
They really don't.
I watched the transformation in real time from he's not going to die to he's going to come back and be the Mashiach. They changed their religion overnight from he's the Mashiach and Mashiach can't die to, oh, what do you know? Mashiach can die because the proof is he's the Mashiach and he died, so he can't die. This is a cult, and this is not honest.
Yeah,
and this is dangerous. Anyway, that's the end of my commentary.
No. But I want you to understand, and this is the thing. I'll say his name. David Berger goes around saying that as if the rabbis in Chabad don't notice what's wrong with all of that.
I read part of his writing on this, and I got the impression that not that they don't know, they are full aware, and they are either choosing to be complacent or complicit, but not that they don't know. They know, and they either are supportive of it, or I don't even think he said he got like phone calls from frantic people who were like, you got to help because this insanity is taking over our community. And he started investigating, and what he found was frightening.
I'll tell you, I've said this to many people, and they wonder how I could possibly say this. If it wasn't for Berger's Hisnagdus, I think it's possible that either Yoel Kahn or Adin Steinsaltz or possibly somebody else would have verbringed on Gimel Tammuz the next year at 770, and there would have been another Chabad Rebbe. But because of his Hisnagdus, it became impossible for the antis, and the antis are very antis. The problem, his Hisnagdus caused more problems in Chabad than it helped. I only came to Chabad afterwards.
I think he took an ideological position, and I respect him for it. Like I said, I'm not an extremist. I think this is his own extremism. And I'll tell you something else, okay?
Rabbi Hartman told me something that I believe he said B'Shem Rav Hutner. If I remember correctly. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he said this B'Shem Rav Hutner. He said, if you wouldn't give a kush, you can't give a patch.
I agree with that.
David Berger would have never, ever, ever given a kush to Chabad. So he can't give a patch.
I don't disagree with you. Again, his brand of Hisnagdus, which means opposition to Chabad, is different than Rav Shach's Hisnagdus to Chabad. Okay,
it predated any of this stuff.
But they all Berger was already critical of Chabad before the Rebbe died.
Exactly.
And so was Rav Shach.
I know, and that is what made it. That is what made it impossible. That is what made it impossible for people who were not, because it became, oh, you're saying the same things. These people have always been criticizing us.
Right. So therefore,
So therefore, these people, it's the same thing they've always been criticizing about us about. It's not a new criticism. It's not something that we need to pay attention to.
Oh, I hear what you're
and
saying.
it
In other
became
words, the
really
fact that they criticized them after he died is meaningless because they equate it with the criticism before he died.
exactly.
I hear
Not
you. In other
only
words,
that,
right.
not
Since
only
he was
that, it
touching all
made it
along,
very difficult. It made it very difficult for the people within Chabad to make these criticisms because it was you're agreeing with David Berger.
No, but you know what?
You're just like David Berger.
Okay, it's true. I know they curse his name, but they call him a pig and whatever else they call him. But
he's a Motzi Shemra. That's what he is.
I'm not. I have too much respect for him to agree.
He's
with
your
that.
Rebbe, and I'm not going to demand that you
not saying he's
denounce
my
him.
Rebbe,
but
he's not my Rebbe. He is
Baruch Hashem,
a dear teacher of mine who I enjoyed a close relationship with during college. I learned a great deal from him. I have a tremendous respect for him.
May he have many long years, and may Hashem help him to do tshuva. But
amen, and me too.
The
Hashem should help me also to do tshuva, and Hashem should help me also to do tshuva.
Amen. I'm
but
just saying, when it comes down to it, when you're the person who was always giving a patch, don't expect to give more patches. The beatings will continue until morale improves. It didn't improve.
I hear you. I want to move on though. I interrupted you, and you were talking about Christians and the Talmud, and I want to hear where that's going.
Well, the reason
Jews that we ignore it, we largely ignore it, but
we largely ignore it, and I think we ignore.
Oh, and they come with their quotes from the Talmud. Their quotes from the Talmud.
My question is, and I wonder about it. Am I doing the right thing when I actually pull up the Talmud and I'm mamish teaching Talmud to Galach?
Are you doing the right thing?
Am I doing the right thing?
Okay, so it depends. Okay, and I'm going to tell you my opinion, and I'm sure people would disagree with me. Okay, but I'm telling you based on my research on the topic and my own logical inference from that research. I don't think I'm the only one who says this, but I'm sympathetic to this view. And that is, when what you're trying to do is damage control, you may do damage control. That means you are saying the Talmud says this. I'm not allowed to teach you Talmud, but I have to set the record straight. So, in other words, this is the argument. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on your.
You're allowed to say whatever you want on my channel.
You know what? When you suggested that I talked to Vanderklay, like we were saying, I think before the broadcast, you know, you have Prager representing Judaism on Jordan Peterson's roundtable, and it's like you couldn't get a rabbi. You know, Prager is going to represent Judaism. He has his own brand of Judaism, which he invented. So how could he represent Judaism, traditional Judaism? So get a rabbi. In other words, there's certain spaces where if the rabbis won't step in because we're afraid to teach Torah to non-Jews, and it's a serious issue, but someone else is going to teach it, and they're going to teach it wrong. V'nimtza shem shamayim eschalel. It's going to come out that the Torah is going to be dragged through the mud, that the Torah is going to be given a bad name. By extension, it reflects poorly on our God, and that's called a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. We maybe need to be brave enough to step into that space, which is traditionally a forbidden space, and say, but the alternative is worse. So what do you want to happen? And this was, I know, Mr. Yoel Teitelbaum over here, you're not going to like what I'm about to say, but you're probably familiar with Ema Banim Semecha. Are you familiar with Ema Banim Semecha?
Which one?
Yisachar Shlomo Tekel.
I'm about to actually. I just named an organization for this little corner, Em Habanim Smecha. So
Okay, there's a
I have
sefer
to
Ein
wonder.
Habanim Smecha. Your friend Chezi,
Oh, the Zionist
certainly knows
one.
about
The
it.
Zionist one. Oh,
The
I didn't
Zionist
I didn't
one.
even think about that one.
Meaning, what I mean about that, the Zionist one, because
Yes.
Zionism is a bad word.
By me it's a
Look
bad
at me.
word.
I'm
Yes.
I wear your black yarmulke. I'm not Mr. Zionist, but I'm broad. I'm open. I'm open.
Yeah.
I can embrace my fellow Zionist Jew and say I love you and I accept you and I agree that your way is valid. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it has to be my way, but it has validity. It has validity. So, Ema Banim Semecha is a book that another great influence in my life.
Mhm.
That, by the way, I don't totally agree with this book. I'm not endorsing the book, but I'm saying it's a beautiful book. There's many beautiful teachings in it. It's a very inspiring book. It surely ruffles the feathers of people in the Yoel Teitelbaum camp. Okay,
It's
but
very it's if I remember correctly, reading something about it, it's very into midrashim and things like that, and not so much halachic.
no, both. No, I would say he spends a lot of time with halacha and a lot of time with medrash. So,
Okay.
so why did I bring up Imam Semecha? Oh, he says we're so anti-Zionist, right? And we say, how can you join hands with the heretics? Because the Zionist pioneers were secular and they threw off the yoke of Torah and they were very anti-Torah in their approach, which is true. Nobody can deny that. It's certainly part of the reason for the opposition in the traditional community. That they literally, like the children of Yemen, it's known they literally kidnapped religious children, clipped off their side locks, took away their yarmulke and tzitzit, and raised them secular, not knowing anything about their upbringing, and told the parents the kids died. I mean, how do you not sit shiva for such stories, right? It's these were the this is an inexcusable crime against humanity that was committed by in the name of Zionism, right? So he says, so we said Tame, these people are impure, and we cannot in any way join hands with them, even if there's some redeemable qualities to what they're trying to do. He says, what's the result of that? The result of that is the majority of the settlement, and he's talking in wartime. This is before the state was declared, but there was a settlement. He says the majority of the settlement is secular and totally against the spirit of Torah. Now, if we Orthodox Jews had gotten involved in the Zionist movement and exerted our influence of Torah values, we could have steered this ship in a different direction. And you who want to lament later and say, oh, the state of Israel is secular, it's whose fault is that? He said, whose fault is that? It's you Orthodox Jews who refuse to step up and be a part of this. So you left it wide open for the seculars to come in with their heresy because you wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But if you would have embraced it, if you would have embraced it for what's good about it, not for what's bad about it, and exerted our influence to try and support them in the direction that we want, we would have had a voice, we would have had influence, and we could have created a state as before the state existed. We could have created a state that was a home for Torah, if not one that was a majority one that stood for Torah values. So his words were very prescient. His words were very, very prescient. And in that spirit, whether you agree or not, I don't want to get political, but in that spirit, I feel like you made a certain Eim Habanim Smecha petition to me. And I'm like, why would I want to talk to Vanderklay? You know, this is not my gig. I'm a rabbi. I don't counsel, non-Christians.
It is.
I'm saying a non-Jew who wants to be a Noahide, I have what to say to him. But a Christian, I'm not trying to convert him, and I don't believe in his religion. So why do I want to talk to him? But you said it because that's this space that you're creating of sort of this, what I consider a certain, has anyway a certain connection to Neo-Hasidism and whatnot. of sort of spirituality online, okay,
Yeah.
is
Well,
going.
okay. So yeah, yeah. It's funny. There's a lot I agree with that, and it's really funny to me because just the other day, like within the past week, I decided to name the organization for how we're gonna run these channels. Em Habanim Smecha. And I was not thinking at all of that because I was thinking of everything else. But Garth brings up an important thing he asked before. And so David Wolpe, if there's one person in the world I wish wasn't a rabbi and whose name wasn't known, it would be David Wolpe.
Is this the guy who said the Exodus never happened? Yeah, I'm with you. What can I tell you? I'm with you on that.
My sister...
Very tragic, very tragic public statement from someone who has a title rabbi who's not Orthodox, and in no way would any Orthodox rabbi ever endorse such a statement. Should be on record.
And
out of hand.
It's not just that. David, I ultimately... So my sister has 3 kids, and the first 2 got bar mitzvahed at Wolpe's synagogue, and I told my sister, if the third one, I'm not coming to the bar mitzvah if you have it at his synagogue, because so many times it got too far. But David Wolpe, in a very real sense, is the rabbi in this little corner of the internet that everybody knows. He's the one who goes on the podcasts, as opposed to Rabbi Breitowitz. If anybody was going to be at that table with Jordan Peterson, it should have been Rabbi Breitowitz, I think. If Lex Friedman is talking to anybody, and if anybody here knows anything to get to Lex Friedman, it should be Rabbi Breitowitz.
Yes. I have to just emphatically say that. And Rabbi Breitowitz is going to give Wolpe a run for his money. And I'll tell you why. I mean, again, he doesn't need my endorsement, but just the facts on the ground. His Q&A podcast, which I found out about, has hundreds of thousands of downloads. I mean, it's not normal for an Orthodox rabbi to have so many people across the internet listening to him. And his message is pure Torah. His message is pure mainstream. His message is pure middle of the road. He's not extreme in one direction. He's not extreme in the other. He'll represent all the views. He'll say, some say like this and some say like that. And now let's be reasonable. Now let's be reasonable human beings and agree that it makes sense if we meet in the middle, right? He's so balanced and he's so honest. He doesn't obscure. He doesn't pretend like, it doesn't say like this somewhere just because it's not politically correct. But he knows the sources on the extreme right and in the extreme left within tradition. He's not a rabbi to say like the truth is somewhere in this mix. Judaism is broad. It's broad, and I love that he has the breadth of knowledge and the bravery to say the truth, even in an extremist Orthodox milieu, where I'm sure he gets clobbered for some of the things he says, because many of the extremists are against saying rational, reasonable things that have Torah sources. They want to pretend that there's only one lane to travel on, and it just isn't so. So I love that Rabbi Breitowitz is outspoken and he's getting the airtime that he deserves, and it should only grow.
Amen. And one of the things he said, which this corner of the internet, their ears will perk up. Somebody asked him about psychedelics, and he said that he thinks in the proper place there is room to be matir. And people lost their mind.
Retracted.
He didn't retract it.
He retracted. I listened to both broadcasts when
I did too.
His opening on psychedelics and his retraction on psychedelics, and he admitted that he misrepresented the view about psychedelics, which he said over from Aryeh Kaplan, I believe, who's like the meditation rabbi.
There was something he made a correction. But ultimately he said he cannot say that it's something that's usser, that there's no place for.
But with where it ended off, it was such a limited avenue.
Of course, chas v'shalom. I'm not telling anybody
as to
that they
basically
should
say this is not the way, but it's an intriguing idea. That's like it's an intriguing idea, but it's certainly not endorsed.
The fact is,
in
when
any legitimate way.
Of course, he's not endorsing it, and he's not.
But he's saying there is no endorsement for it in the Torah world.
But if it's not so tameh that suddenly, like everything else, we for refuah, if it is genuinely for refuah and a rofeh.
Anything about refuah? He didn't say anything about refuah. He talked about it in the context of meditation and reaching spiritual heights and nevuah, etc. There was nothing about refuah.
No. That was the first one. In the second one, he talked about.
What connection is there between psychedelics and refuah? You want to tell me medical marijuana? Marijuana is not.
No. This is very different. John Vervaeke, who is very big in this corner of the internet, is a professor of psychology, and Jordan Peterson is a professor of psychology, and at the very least, in the treatment of addictions, psychedelics like psilocybin have been shown, and in for PTSD, MDMA has been shown. So no, we're talking about something very different. We're not talking marijuana.
That wasn't the context that Rabbi Breitowitz talked about psychedelics.
That's how I understood him speaking about meditation, about being matir.
Nevuah. That was the context.
That's
not refuah.
Maybe I should listen. Well, this is part of the problem. When a posek speaks, he has to be incredibly careful what he says, and he is a posek. This is,
Chachamim hizaharu b'divreichem.
Amen. Good thing. I'm more like the what is it? The Chachmei Chalm.
Yeah, give it. Don't be self-deprecating.
Why not?
You're definitely a wise guy, Jacob. You're definitely a wise guy.
I'm definitely a wise guy. Yeah, a wise guy I am. No, but actually, I have to say that I sometimes wondered, like, especially I wondered why wasn't my chelek to be somebody who could sit and learn and steig and actually become a rav and something like that. And I've kind of settled on Hashem also needs putzes around to say things that a rav can't.
No, you remind me of I'm sorry to say this. I don't mean it the way it's going to sound. Okay. You remind me of Elisha ben Avuya. In other words, because when Rav Meir said to him, Chazor bech, right? He said, repent. And Rebbe Meir was his disciple. And he went to his Rebbe and said, Chazor bech. And he said, what? He said, I heard a bas call. I heard a voice from heaven emerge and say, anyone can do teshuvah except for Elisha ben Avuya.
Yeah.
Right? And what's our understanding of that? Our understanding of this was his own self-talk. This wasn't a voice from heaven, but to him it sounded that way.
I thought the Gemara there says it was actually a bas kol that comes out.
Listen to what Rabbi Breitowitz has to say about that.
Okay.
Because the question is, what is a bas kol? What is a bas kol? There's a deep topic. We can talk a lot about it, but I think the mainstream view. My view is automatically the mainstream view, by the way.
Of course.
No, it's the way I understand it. The way I've kind of always understood it is that he convinced himself of this. So don't convince yourself that you don't have the potential to be anything you want to be. Now, I sound like a parent talking to the child. You could be anything you want to be, but I mean it sincerely as like a rabbinic counselor to a fellow Jew is you're not stuck where you are. In Ruchnius, you wanna grow, you can grow. You wanna steig,
Right.
you can steig.
Right. No. Look, as far as steiging, I could definitely. No, that's my fault. But I've convinced myself, and maybe I'm wrong, that if I was more halachically observant, there are definitely places I wouldn't go. There's definitely places I would have never gone that I have gone, that I have been able to. I've. It very much felt to me like Hakadosh Baruch Hu put me where I was, so that I was able to help certain people in ways that I don't think. I think I was there for them more than just because I'm a Baal Taiva.
I would say can sein, as we say in Yiddish, it could be. It could. It's for sure. Everything happens for a reason. And my Rebbe, another Rebbe of mine, Rebbe Zachariah Wallerstein, gave over to us strongly the lesson that even the mistakes you make are beshert. Now, that's a dangerous idea because it could excuse a lot of things. Well, beshert, so it's not meaning. We do our best. We trip up. We have to make amends for the mistakes that we make. But sometimes after it was all said and done, we see I was meant to make that mistake because X, Y, Z. Doesn't necessarily exempt me from having to make it right. But everything's from Hashem, even the mistakes that we make. So you could find in those times like, oh, I did this thing and I went to this place and I see the good that Hashem was able to make out of it. And had I not done that, maybe, this good thing wouldn't have happened. I think there is merit to that approach, that right, but not to use it lechatchila
As an excuse.
as
Okay.
as a reason to go and do it.
So this'll come into where my kafira and Chezi's kafira run together.
Chezi's kafira, you calling him a koifer on public YouTube? Who's the
I wouldn't have him on if he wasn't a kafir. No.
Oh no, what does that say about me?
There might be a shtickle kafira in you too, but
you need to let me know so I could do tshuva. Is it what I said about Miller?
So that
I'm too warm and fuzzy.
You are a little warm and fuzzy, but that's why I love you. The part of the problem I think with the Torah world, which I wish the Torah world was a little bit more focused on priorities which aren't. Look, is it really, really that much more important that you spend your time? This is Chezi's thing with kosher services, both doing hot water and then putting foil all over for Pesach, right? Is that so much more important than all the other things you could be doing? And kosher mahadran, right? I remember rabbi after rabbi after rabbi trying to convince people to stop with the halak Beis Yosef, especially in the Sephardic community. And yeah. Yes.
I could hear it. Listen, just to hear where I am, I could hear it in the Ashkenazi community to say that, because Chalak Beit Yosef is Beit Yosef for a reason, because that's the Sephardic tradition. But
it's not
Ashkenazim. We had to be from as them So we needed to keep up with the Joneses. So we also created like a baseline of halak glat, but it wasn't the way our ancestors ate. So you could say in the Ashkenazi community, why don't we cut it out with the glat? I
Also,
hear
it's
that.
not so
You want to
clear.
take that away from the Svardim?
Yes.
I have a hard time with that.
Well, okay. So I'll give you the svara that the Rav who was actually like going around in Los Angeles giving shiurim in Sephardic Sephardic Rav, right? In Sephardic Kehilas, trying to get them to lay off the Chalak Beit Yosef.
I'd like to hear his basis for that.
I'll give you. So
Unless his basis is we're not really eating it anyway. Like what you think you're eating with the glat label is not really glat anyway.
Listen.
Mirrors,
listen.
maybe.
Listen. So he asked a simple question. Hayotze mina tame, correct?
Yeah.
And if you shecht an animal and it's not kosher, right? Then its milk is not kosher, correct?
Yeah.
How do you drink milk when we shecht all these animals and not even close to rov are kosher?
Okay. So let me answer you with the caveat that I'm not an expert in this area of halacha, but I have studied the sugyas to some degree. So I'm going to answer on the knowledge base that I have. But I'm not an authority. A rabbi tells that rov behemos einon treifos. Okay, the majority of animals are not treif. Treif, for your viewers, means that the Torah forbids eating an animal that's been literally torn in the field, and that includes an animal that has wounds internally that would render it unable to survive 12 months. Okay, we're going to be very technical now. And there's this issue of glat, which is the lungs of the animal have lesions, and these lesions present a problem of trephus, meaning that they are these internal wounds that indicate a malady that would make the animal unfit for consumption. However, the baseline Jewish law is that if you can remove the lesions without tearing the lung, then they don't count. In other words, that indicates that the lesion is not one of the problematic lesions if it can be removed easily. If it tears the lung, then that's a problematic lesion and the animal cannot be eaten. That's a kosher, that indicates that the meat is kosher. And then that's assuming all the other laws are kept also with kosher slaughter, etc. But just an examination of the internal organs. The Sephardic community has a stringency that any lesions make it unfit for eating. So the lung has to be totally smooth with no lesions, removable or not removable. And that's where the term glat kosher comes from, because glat in Yiddish means smooth. A smooth lung without lesions meets the criteria of this strict, stringent view. Now, you're going to make the case like this. Wait a second. But when I heard this before from meat inspectors, okay, when we kill the animals and we inspect the lungs, most of them have lesions. Very few of them have no lesions. That's a minority, right?
It's not even 10%.
Under 10%? You know more than I do.
That's what I heard from a shochet.
You know more than I do. I don't have conflicting data. So, but of the ones that have lesions, most of them can be rendered kosher by removing the lesions. Now, so if you look objectively and say, when the rabbi said most animals are rov behenos einon treifos, most animals are not treif. So what seems to fit that criteria is the removable lesions and not the smooth lungs. Smooth lungs don't fit because that's a minority of animals, not most animals. So those are certainly kosher. But to say the ones that have lesions that could be removed are not kosher would seem to conflict with this statement of the sages. And therefore, okay, so one approach is to say, well, we know that really the ones with the lesions are okay, but just to be safe, sometimes we make a fence and we say we're not going to eat the ones with the lesions, lest we come to eat the ones with the problematic lesions. So any lesions, we are choosing to create a fence, which we know is not necessarily required. And we'll only eat the smoother ones because those there's no doubt about. So we know what's objectively kosher and not, but because we don't want to make an error, we go strict. Okay. So if you take that approach, it really answers the question of, okay, so since we know most animals are kosher, then I can drink the milk that emerges from most animals on the assumption that it's kosher before I check, which is a different that's a different law. So, but if I say no, it's really absolutely 100% not kosher unless it's totally smooth, then how do you drink the milk? You're right, because that means most animals are not kosher. You can't drink the milk from them. And even if you go as far as to say, but you can't take that position. Why can you not take that position? Because our rabbis told us that most animals are not treif. So you can't conflict with the rabbis and say, when I say the rabbis, I mean the rabbis of yore, what we call in Hebrew
the sages. But
the sages
Rabbi
of yore,
Mollot,
whose opinions are enshrined forever as absolute legal.
Well, okay. Whether or not b'metzias, what they said at the time, but whether the metzias can, because we do say nishtana.
I was going to get there. So I meant to say is you can't conflict with the statement of the sages blatantly and call yourself an Orthodox Jew. So you can't say, the sages said that most animals are kosher, but we say most animals are not. You can't take that position. So how do you justify it? Basically what Jacob just said, that when the sages said it, the reality was like that. But over time, animals became more sickly, and now the majority are not kosher. Well, if the majority are not kosher, you can't drink the milk. So that's what this Sephardic rabbi is coming along to say. You have to choose. You either choose the milk, or you choose glatt, but you can't have both. Now, I have a problem with this. I don't know who this rabbi is, but I have a very strong problem with what he's saying.
Which is?
What he's saying is, I'm going to paraphrase what he's saying. I am smarter than Rabbi Yosef Karo, the author of Beis Yosef, because I figured out the logical fallacy in his halachic opinion that he didn't realize.
No.
There's no way on planet Earth that you're smarter than Rabbi Yosef Karo.
Nobody, chas v'shalom, you're strawmanning him.
Okay.
Chas v'shalom. The Beis Yosef had a magid. The Beis Yosef.
So I'm smarter than the magid.
No, chas v'shalom. Chas v'shalom. Nobody's saying that I figured out something that I'm smarter than the Beis Yosef. Whether or not the Beis Yosef ruled on the Metzias at the time, the fact is, nowadays, if you want to be machmir like the Beis Yosef, then you should be machmir like the Beis Yosef.
Yeah, but explain to me, why was the Beis Yosef machmir to begin with if he also drank milk?
First of all, are you sure that the Beis Yosef, that the animals that the Beis Yosef was inspecting, and when he said that rove behemoths weren't also coming out kosher?
That the rove behemoths were glatt in his time.
I would say that if the Beis Yosef saw that he was rendering,
no, you can't do that. You can't.
What do you mean? Why can't I do that?
Because if that's true,
yeah,
that means that the baseline is glatt, and then you're right. You can't drink milk. In other words, what I mean to say is, rather than advocate drink milk and don't eat glatt, he should be advocating eat glatt, don't drink milk. You hear?
If
That's the position that really the majority of animals were glatt, and anything with a lesion is treif, and the nature of things changed so that now we find the majority of animals are not glatt, so don't drink milk. You can't suddenly backtrack on that and be like, in other words, if you hold that way, then you hold that non-glatt is not kosher.
Hold on.
I'm making a much more reasonable argument, and I'm saying that we should take the position that glatt is a fence, so we don't confuse the problematic lesions with the non-problematic lesions.
You're not hearing my svara.
For sure good, and the nature of animals did not change from the time of Chazal.
You're not hearing my svara. You're not hearing my svara. Okay. My svara is that if the Beis Yosef saw that when he was shechting animals, if he were to see when he was shechting animals that in fact rov behemoths were tameas bemetzias, he would have been choser on his own view because rov behemoths kasheris. That's did not really have that
weird to me.
Kasha.
Let me reiterate what I think you're saying, because it logically doesn't fly for me. So tell me where I'm misunderstanding. Since Chazal said,
not since one thing. Let me give you the svara of
whatever the rov behemoths are. That's ain't a trevos. So if it used to be glatt used to be kosher and non-glatt used to be treif. Then when rov behemoths changed to be mostly not glatt, now not glatt is kosher.
Hold on. Let me add something.
What you're saying?
No, it's not. Because I don't think that I think that this, and I understand giving a svara to what Chazal said is already a bit dochek, but we see that most animals don't die in a year.
Oh.
And when Chazal said rov behemoths kasheras, it was because we see animals generally live. They're generally not treifas. And so when we shecht animals, similarly we must follow that same observation that the Rabbanan had.
No, it's just look and see. They're not dropping dead. So it must be whatever the condition is not a deadly condition. And therefore, whatever that condition is makes it kosher. But you want to say used to be that the ones with the lesions that we would now consider not problematic if you're Ashkenazi, even though we're glatt now Ashkenazi, but in other words, the Ramah, right, would have considered kosher. Then in the times of Chazal, those ones were dropping dead?
I have to say, I already think that we've become in our halachic, we've become so machmir and so medayek on things, especially regarding kashrus, and not recognizing that Chazal were looking at the world and they were seeing, and similarly we have to see. So let's talk about fish and meat together, right? Chazal say that it's a sakana to eat.
Maybe they do.
Okay.
Did you look it up?
I don't know the.
There's a very vague. There's a very vague Gemara.
Lamaisa, the frum world.
Lamaisa, that's right. We paskin it's a sakana. That's right.
We paskin it's a sakana, and the frum world doesn't.
You don't have to necessarily put it.
Did we lose Rabbi Mollot?
Looking X and Y together. Did you lose
We
me?
lost you for 2 minutes. We lost you just just for a second.
The Gemara talks about a certain disease that resulted from eating something X that was
Kashalatsaras, I think it was.
cooked with Y. You may remember the exact language better than me. It's been a number of years since I looked at that, but I'm speaking from memory, obviously. But it's a very specific item, and the question is, did the Gemara mean to extend it to all similar items in all manners of cooking and mixing? And there's a specific incident that the Gemara records that becomes the basis of, that could lead to a specific illness that the Gemara specifies. So it may be that because we just don't know what the Gemara's intention was, we're machmir to not permit any fish and meat mixtures. It's not clear that the Gemara did forbid that. And as far as I'm not an expert in Rambam, just put it out there. I'm not an expert in Rambam. I seem to have this impression in my mind that the Rambam does not codify this as law. In other words, the fish and meat prohibition, to my knowledge, is not in Rambam. I did this. We learned the sugya, and as I recall, this is not found in Rambam. So, in other words, for whatever reason, he felt that it was not a danger generally nowadays, or in his time, or whatever the case was. I'm just contextualizing when you say the Gemara forbids it. I wouldn't say it's clear the Gemara forbids it. I would say the halacha forbids it.
I want to be respectful of your time, and you have to leave in 10 minutes to go daven mincha. The reason I brought all of this up, and it's been so much fun. It reminds me of my of the days when I was back in yeshiva, which were heaven. The reason I brought this up is because I think that there is a place, and Chezi brings this up a lot as well, where there is not a kibbul all of what the Chachamim say by the general frum public, especially the Haredi public, and
especially, what did you say? The Haredi public are the most reverent of the words of Chazal to a fault. When I say a fault, to a fault, that's not to say that we should not revere the words of Chazal. But
I'm not talking about Chazal. I'm not talking about Chazal. I'm talking about, for example, Rav Ovadia Yosef. It was very relevant, especially in the Sephardic community, that his kulas, Rav Ovadia's a mekel.
Yeah, that's a very wrong approach.
And it happens a lot. People can say things like that.
Ravadia's a mekel. I could tear Kriya if people understood the library of knowledge in that man's brain, and he did arguably a more thorough job than the Beis Yosef anthologizing the poskim. In other words, in the Beis Yosef's time, when he was living in the 15th century, I don't even know when he lived, 15th century maybe.
16th century.
He didn't have an internet, and Ravadi also didn't have an internet. But I'm saying he didn't have the modern technology to. They didn't have the printed source. I'm not sure when the printing. He printed
when Bar Ilan University was building a search engine for their Project Hashut, they would use Rav Ovadia's Shutim to check the search engine.
Right, to make sure they had enough sources. But I'm saying, okay, the Beis Yosef did a very impressive job, which is arguably why it's more impressive than Rav Ovadia, anthologizing poskim, that is halachic authorities from his time when it was very difficult to get a hold of printed material or manuscript material. This is the olden days, right? And he does a tremendous job with it, and created the Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch, etc. But Rav Ovadia, okay, it's true, he had a much bigger library at his fingertips more easily, but the amount of information that man was able to absorb and anthologize into an encyclopedia of halacha, again, like on par with Shulchan Aruch, on par with Rambam in a certain respect. That
You're preaching to the choir.
He's just a makil. He hears the question. He goes, what's an easy way out of this? Is like, you're an idiot.
I'm glad we agree, but I think there's a tendency.
He knew everything. He's a makil.
You're preaching to the choir. You're preaching to the choir. But at the same time, you definitely get a lot. It is, people constantly think they're being machmir, and a lot of times their humras are in ways kulas on other things, and Hakadosh Baruch Hu chas al mamonam shel Yisrael and koach de hetera adif and all of these things, and I have to say that part of me has also, as much as I love, there are definitely poskim I have a lot of respect for. At the same time, I don't feel comfortable saying that I know that when I get a psak din, that there's siyata d'shmaya, and there's that as they paskin lamata is also how it's being paskin lamala.
I was gonna bring that up about the treifus thing. That's Rabbi Akiva's Tat's approach to it. He says, what's the mitzias? Did they die? Did they not die? He says, depends. In the lands where they paskin that they die, and in the lands where they paskin they don't die, because what does it say?
Chacham gozer
goymer olai, right side the goyzer kodesh baruch hu makayim. That's the mystical approach. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the only approach or the correct approach. It's an approach. But again, I think like these things can be confirmed statistically if somebody wants to do the homework.
We only have 3 minutes left, and
well, invite me back.
You are, my channel is your channel.
I'll tell you what. Whatever. Let me know. I don't have work this week, so
okay.
I'm pretty open. I know your schedule's probably a little less flexible than mine this week, but in general,
mine is much more flexible than yours, except this week.
In general, it's hard for me to ignore my kids for 2 hours during the day.
Yeah.
So happens my wife is out of town, so I can ignore her, but the kids are still here, and I have to be a dad too. But I really enjoy these conversations.
Me too. I want to give you the last word, let you say everything and anything you need to. By the way, there's a link below to Tenak Talk, which is the largest Noahide channel where Rabbi Mollot, did I say that correctly? teaches weekly parsha, and he actually spends a lot of time preparing. It's a beautiful shir. Rabbi Breitowitz also has a parsha shir, so I don't know which one to recommend.
Go to Rabbi Breitowitz. I'm Rabbi Breitowitz, like well. Pinky toenail in Torah.
Rabbi Breitowitz.
I could aspire to be his pinky toenail.
Me too. So, no, last words are all yours.
I really don't. I don't have. I feel bad that we started so many threads of conversation, and then kind of ADD'd off of that. I hope that's not offensive to people with ADD, but no, they call it ADHD now. Yes. I didn't prepare any final remarks. I just want to say thank you to Jacob for having me on the channel. I think there is maybe one final word, which is, again, thank you to Jacob for having me on the channel. And thank you to Jacob for everything that he does to bring together so many different types of people into his corner of the internet and try to find bridges and commonalities between one another common spaces. I think it's a beautiful thing. And what I was saying before about, if somebody doesn't step in to be the rabbi, then the alternative is something worse. I feel like there was a broader context to that statement that I was making that connected to other things. But
David Wolpe is definitely even worse than me stepping in.
I don't want to bash anybody. I regret that he said the things that he did. I don't think he regrets it, but as an Orthodox rabbi, obviously I object. But like what I said before, and I think everyone should take it in context, everybody has good and everybody has less good parts of them. And those aren't intrinsic. We all have what to work on. We all can improve ourselves in as best ways as we can. And of course, I'm including myself in that. And as my Rebbe would say, I'm talking to myself right now. And so, it's an honor for me to be able to be invited to be kind of a rabbi in this space, which what I said to Jacob before, I was a little trepidatious about not his channel per se, but, other channels, because I'm like, what's my business here? But I think this is an opening. This is a first step that I'm actually on Jacob's channel, that the reason I'm doing it. And this was the broader context. I said about damage control, teaching things that normally wouldn't be taught lechatchila, like ideally we wouldn't choose to teach, but sometimes to do damage control, it's the right thing to do. And that's my answer to you on that question. But in other words, my passion and the reason I do what I do, Jacob said, I'm the highest form of rabbi. I'm sitting and teaching small children, and I'm grateful and humbled to have that opportunity in that position. But what I was saying is I'm much more than that. In other words, I have a YouTube channel that's not aimed at second graders. I go on Tenak Talk. It's not aimed at second graders. What I am is a person who's very passionate about Torah, and like Tovia Singer is fond of saying, I'm not God's manager, but I am a spokesperson. Meaning, if I can be an advocate for the beauty of Torah Hashem, the Torah of God Almighty, and can bring people into a connection with Him and a relationship with Him through the Torah. If I could be an emissary for that, I can't think of a greater use of my time on earth. So having an opportunity to be on a channel like this, to take a first step into introducing that opportunity to more people, I'm honored to be able to be here. So people are free to reach me. My email address is my name, Rabbi Rafi Mollot, just the way you see it spelled on the screen without spaces, @gmail.com. You can follow me on social media, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. I'm @Rafi Mollot. On Twitter, I'm @Rafi Mollot. And I'm very happy to fill the role, for those who are looking for it, of a Torah teacher. It's what I do. And thank you for having me.
Ace Lasas Lashem, go daven mincha. And we will have to do this again. And please daven for me and this little corner as well. And I am going to end the broadcast and probably have a just chatting stream a little later. So if people want to join, goodbye, everybody. Shalom, shalom.